It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this conference and also to talk a little bit about one of my passions, which is internationalization of higher education, I would say. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope you are all seeing. Good. So let's start. Talking about the whys of internationalization of higher education in Brazilian higher education institutions. So first, we are gonna talk a little bit about the context of internationalization of higher education in Brazil. And then I'm going to talk about the strategy of internationalization process at PUC Rio Grande do Sul. And later, my point of view about re-signifying internationalization of higher education. So here we go. Talking about Brazilian higher education context, we have 2,537 higher education institutions, and they are composed by universities, university centers, colleges, and federal institutes. We would say that the main difference is that universities, they are focused on research. 88% of Brazilian higher education institutions are private, and we have 199 universities, and 107 are public, 92 are private, a total of almost 17 million students enrolled in higher education. And the curiosity is that universities hold 52, almost 53% of all enrollments, according to our Ministry of Education data. So talking a little bit about internationalization of higher education in Brazil, our first higher education institutions were founded in 1808, so we are quite new universities. And our Brazilian economy opened only in the 90s. So we started exporting and importing goods only in the 90s. So of course, higher education internationalization is a quite incipient process for you to know. And we usually talk about mobility when we talk about internationalization. Our inbound mobility is around 16,000 students and outbound mobility about 34,000 students, according to our Ministry of Education data. So it called my attention, the name of our conference, which is The Whys. And there's an author called Simon Sinek from the business area. And he created the theory, actually, of the golden circle. And he says that successful organizations, they are successful because they always start with why. That's his book here. And that makes lots of sense. So if you will start with the why of you are doing things, then you are going to have a purpose. You are going to have a real motivation for that. And that's the concept. And that's why I usually apply that in my management practices and with my team as well. We always start with why. So talking about internationalization of higher education in Brazil, we had previously political and academic motivations. The political motivation was focused on global knowledge, economy insertion. So we had government initiatives in order to promote that. And of course, academic motivations for the quality of education and research, mostly at universities. So the other higher education institutions, they are not, I would say, pushing internationalization process or considering as a strategy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this public funding from in the years 2000, I would say. Then we started the intentional systematic process of internationalization of higher education in our universities. So we had three, more than that, but I'm going to focus on these three really important public funding projects. Science Without Borders, Languages Without Borders, and Cap Sprint. So Science Without Borders happened from 2011 to 2015. It was our first government initiative focused on I would say, developing internationalization of higher education. It was focused on mobility only and undergraduate mobility as well. So more than 100,000 scholarships were granted. Of course, it brought Brazil to the spotlight. So now Brazil is known in the area of internationalization, international education. And before we were quite far from that. But there are some critics about this program. First, that Brazil was seen as international educational services buyer. The amount of money that was put on that without, I would say, not correct, but without management. So it was we had lots of investment, but we didn't have the results that we wanted to. The focus on undergraduates and also on specific countries as well. For example, we didn't have connections with Latin America, and the focus on undergrad was due to the focus on research for internationalization was considered a little bit, I would say, more developed than for undergrad. And linguistic proficiency, because we do have a lack of English knowledge proficiency here in Brazil. And we learned with that. And then our government launched in 2012, Languages Without Borders. It was supposed to train English at first and then after other languages as well, but training faculty, students, and staff as well, and also Portuguese classes for students who wanted to study Portuguese. So here we could see a starting shift from the internationalization process understanding in Brazil, because first it was focused on mobility, outbound mobility only. And then we started seeing that it was necessary to train faculty to develop this international mindset with the students and staff training at universities as well. And then in 2018, CAP Sprint is the third most important project funded by our government, in which 36 universities were selected. It has a focus on research and post-grad programs, and it also has the institutional approach. So now we move forward this vision of individual internationalization to a more institutional approach. So institutions or universities, they had to build or construct an internationalization plan and have indicators in order to manage, have this partnership with world-class universities. That's the first time that we heard the concept, the definition of comprehensive internationalization from Hodzic, and the management in the program Science Without Borders. The management was due to the government, and that's why we had lots of criticisms. And now with CAP Sprint, we have the management inside universities. So higher education institutions participants are intended to contribute to innovation and competitiveness. That's a learning process to Brazil. So now we see that quality of education and quality of research refers to internationalization, and it's linked. We do have institutional strategies at our universities. Collaboration diversity increased considerably. We only focused in the United States, UK, and now we have partners spread all over the world. Discussions on internationalization at home and internationalization of the curriculum, they are considered quite important in this scenario nowadays here in Brazil. And something that I would like to call your attention is that we have the approach to social responsibility. We can see that there's another higher education internationalization dimension, the social role and responsibility of higher education. So we are talking about the concept of internationalization and social inclusion, and also the global citizenship mindset development. Social responsibility and this global citizenship mindset development are increasingly more present here in Brazil and in developing countries as well, because that's a theme that affects us directly. So the social mission of universities is considered as well, not only economic motivations, but other motivations as well. So are we moving towards inclusive internationalization? There's an author, and I remember that yesterday, Hans de Witt talked about the rationales for internationalization, considering four: academic, political, economic, and social cultural. And this author, who studies internationalization of education, proposed aiding humanism as a fifth category in this rationales for internationalization. So even Hans, Cassol, Avila, and Johns, they bring the idea that not simply on the basis of how successful we are in our competition with the developed world, but how we can operate successfully in our local and regional contexts and make a meaningful and responsible contribution to the society we are part of. Of course, we face lots of challenges: insufficient financing, lack of long-term planning, and continuity, because some of these programs that I've mentioned, they are proposed by government, they are government funding, and we do have lots of political problems here. So sometimes if the party don't win the election, it's gonna be seized. So that's a constant characteristic of our region, and we have to face these challenges. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about internationalization process at PUC Rio Grande do Sul. PUC is one of the best and most prestigious higher education institutions in the country, focused on research as well. And in 2018, we celebrated 7 years of existence. We are located in Porto Alegre. It's the capital of the state of Rio Grande do Sul, in the south of Brazil. We have a total now of 40,000 students, and our alumni community is composed of about 170,000 people. Some of our accolades: we are the best private university in Rio Grande do Sul, according to Times Higher Education ranking, the best private university in the country, according to our national ranking, and according to CAPES, which is the Brazilian Federal Agency for Support and Evaluation of Graduate Education. It's a branch of the Ministry of Education, the one that proposed CAPES-Sprint, the program I've mentioned before. We are considered the best graduate programs in the country. And that's why we had CAPES-Sprint granted. So we have our institutional plan of internationalization, and it is, I want to call your attention that even in our strategic plan for the whole university, not only for internationalization, we consider in our mission that by 2022, PUC Rio Grande do Sul, we have become, in accordance with its mission, an international reference in higher education. So it's in our vision, the term and the process of internationalization as something that we want to. The conceptual model that we use is the comprehensive internationalization I've mentioned before. That is a commitment confirmed through action to infuse international and comparative perspectives in the whole university in all services: teaching, learning, research, and all service of the university. So we had to make some decisions. We had to prioritize areas for internationalization: health and human development, with a special focus on early childhood and aging. We also considered world in motion, individuals and society, social and economic development, migration, violence, and human rights, humanism, education, and culture in the area of connectivity, technology and biodiversity, sustainability, energy, and the environment, and technological innovations for a dynamic and interconnected world in the areas of materials, microelectronics, robotics, and artificial intelligence, themes that are considered already internationalized in our university. Some strategic goals: enhance the quality of teaching, research, extension, and extension we call in Portuguese extensão, and in Spanish extensión, que is, it's like outreach. So for you to understand, we have teaching, research, and extension. Innovation and management activities at the university: promote the consolidation of international research networks, aiming the excellence of academic production, and of course, greater competitiveness in the search for funding for our research. Funding is a problem for us. Implement a policy to attract and welcome international students, faculty, and researchers as well. Promote the mobility of students, faculty, and the staff, and allow these parties to gain international expertise. Develop strategic areas to expedite the process of transferring results to society. And here we can see again this motivation of giving value to society and contributing to society. Advance the consolidation of the ecosystem of innovation of PUC Rio Grande do Sul. Implement language policies based on the perspective of inclusive internationalization. So talking about internationalization structures, our structure is supported by the following actors. So we have the Office for International Cooperation working together with the Internationalization Management Group, the Office of Communication and Marketing, and a team that manages the project as well, considering indicators and all that. So what's the role of the Office for International Cooperation? The Office has clear goal that we want to consolidate the internationalization of teaching, research, and extension, the outreach I've mentioned before, at our university. So we developed some projects in order to assist this strategy. And the first one is assessing and measuring. We had decentralized data and input and output indicators, that the status that we had before. Where do we want to get? And we are working for that. Centralized and monitored data, impact and outcomes indicators. And that's why I asked Hans yesterday, what were the outcomes indicators that he suggested? We are working on it. Strategic partners, it was talked about it before. We have 216 existing agreements, but active ones 127. And I would say active, the ones that we have mobility with. Where do we want to get? We want to qualify our partners. That's exactly what we were discussing before, instead of having quantity, and defining strategic partnerships as well. We are in this process. And we develop international business plan for undergrad programs, graduate programs, certificate programs, and extension as well, because we have the institutional plan of internationalization of our university, which is a huge guideline and a politic for internationalization, but we want to unfold in the areas in a tactical view, with an action plan and deadlines and all that. That's why we have the IBP for each level. And the other project, International Mindset Development. So we have a partnership with our communication sector, because we had punctual communication of specific actions. We want to increase visibility of the institution and promote worldwide, of course, but internally as well, for our community, for our students. This international mindset for our community development is quite important as well. Mobility improvement. We have few students who have the opportunity, and that's a characteristic that we have quite different from other countries. Our student usually is a worker who studies. So he works during the day to study at night and support his studies. So they usually don't have money or time to travel and be like 6 months in another country. So we want to increase outcomes. We want to provide better services. We want to provide students, faculty, visitors best experience when they come and when they go. And that's why we created the virtual exchange program, which will provide online collaborative learning opportunities at an international level by engaging students from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. So virtual exchange promoted by faculty, researchers, and professionals will provide our students opportunities for international education without a high cost for mobility. We were the first university to launch our virtual mobility program in Brazil, and we are very proud of that. We also have COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning, which is a methodology based on project learnings, and we have international partners for that. International virtual experiences proposed by faculty, international webinars, and online double degree programs. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my point of view, which is resignifying internationalization of higher education. And I'm going to provoke and give you some time to think and reflect about everything I'm going to talk about. So what's the role of higher education? What should we as higher education institutions deliver? What is the higher education institution's mission? What were we created for? What's our why? Why do we have universities? And what about faculty mission? What's our professors, what's their mission? Teach, mediate learning process, develop students competencies, provide them the opportunities to develop these competencies. And what are higher education students' expectations when they enroll in higher education? What do they need? What do they want? And what does our society need? We need a future with social justice, of course, economically viable as well. We are talking about environmental consciousness. We are talking about equality or equity. So we need global citizens with a sense of belonging. So talking about graduate competencies, what competencies our graduates should develop in order to improve and better develop our society in the terms that we are discussing now? Employability, of course, that's one of the main needs of our students when they enroll in higher education institutions. If I want to be a doctor, I'm going to take my medicine course, and because I want to be a doctor, and I must have technical abilities and competencies in order to be a doctor, of course, or a lawyer or whatever. So it's linked to employability, but we cannot forget that we live in a global society. And what I mean is that our global society is interconnected, highly connected, actually, multicultural and diverse. And we do have many global issues to deal with. So are these competencies important? Effectively communicate with people from other cultural backgrounds, work with multicultural teams. I remember that when I was a child here in Brazil, we had some companies that would export. Now in our tech park inside our university, we have startups that are born global. So multicultural teams, they are part of our lives nowadays. Ability to think globally and consider problems in diverse perspectives. Capacity to professionally make use of technical world-class patterns and practices. Be engaged with global issues. Wow. If these competencies are important, and I do believe they are, so we cannot say that we are dealing with that if we consider that we only develop international perspectives and intercultural competencies in our students when they have mobility, the opportunity for mobility. Internationalization should be more inclusive and less elitist, as Hans David said. International students' mobility represent, according to OCDE, only 3% of the total of enrollments is students enrolled in higher education. So mobility is restricted to a limited percentage of higher education students worldwide. If internationalization is mobility and represent only 3% of the total, what are we doing with 97%? Let's start with why again, right? So what really matters? Why internationalization? If it's not to develop international perspectives or give the students the conditions and the opportunity to develop international perspectives and intercultural competencies, because that's what we want, that's what they need, that's what our society needs. So when we talk about internationalization, we have to see that mobility is part of that, and it's an important part, of course. We do have countries that became clusters of international education, and they do have these economical motivations, as Brazil has it too. But we cannot forget that when we talk about internationalization of education, we are talking about education. So mobility is a great part, but we also have internationalization at home activities, internationalization of the curriculum, and the comprehensive internationalization we've talked before. The words that come to my mind now is resignification and innovation. The crisis that just came because mobility numbers, they were increasing worldwide all the time. And now we cannot travel anymore. Students cannot travel anymore. So maybe the crisis could be an opportunity, a time for change. And we usually play here in Brazil that Brazilians, we usually see the bright side of the things. That's probably why I see this as an opportunity. That's the image I would like to show you. That's a tree, you know, and here we have plant germinating. Why not talking about a democratization of internationalization? If only some students, few students had the opportunity for mobility and to develop intercultural competencies and have international perspectives during their learning process, why we are not talking about a democratization of internationalization? And also an inclusive approach for internationalization as well. The opportunities I can see, accessible internationalization now through the use of technology. We can have a collective effort as a strategy as countries that we didn't have the opportunity. And you know that it's quite different from Europe, that countries, they are small and close to each other. So in order to travel to another city here in Brazil is almost going to another country in other continents. Have strategic partners and alliances to make things happen and give value to the educational process, considering internationalization. And internationalization is a need. It's a labor market requirement and society requirement as well. So we cannot escape from that. And so there's a, I'm going to cite Betty Lisk. She is a scholar who studies internationalization of education, especially internationalization of the curriculum. And she says that we need to ensure that the students of today have access to knowledge and wisdom from all parts of the world, are open to new ideas regardless of the origin of those ideas, develop the capacity to solve trick problems and find innovative solutions, and are committed to actions that benefit others as well as themselves. And then if we provide our students the opportunity, all of our students, an inclusive approach of internationalization, provide all of them the opportunity to have international perspectives and develop intercultural competencies, then we can say that we accomplished our mission. Thank you very much.